which is awesome. And we're about to dive into our final section. Are you guys excited to know a little bit about how to carry this stuff out? Again, this is going to be this is a mini training. And more so than a training, it's like a training of a training. You know, like Pocahontas line, like you never knew what you never knew or whatever. So I'm going to at least tell you what you don't know. So that if you're desirous to engage in this type of work, you would know what you would need to learn in order to be an effective community development worker and really support human-focused development work. And the little plug that I have is we're carrying out a 2-day intensive seminar here at UCSD on May 26th and 27th. It's going to be a Saturday and a Sunday. It's called Ending Poverty by Developing People. And it's going to go into how to actually do the stuff that I'm about to show you is going to be required to do. And so if you are a student and you want to learn this stuff academically, come. 60 UCSD students get in for free because UCSD is helping to run it. At $45 for all other community members, which is just a steal. If you are a volunteer that wants to get involved in international service, it's a must. If you work with or represent or support another organizations involved in development work, come so you can learn, so you can help to change your organization from the inside out. If you are an instructor, come and learn so that you can be able to make sure that you're supporting your students and understanding the best practices of this type of work. Developingpeople.info. Okay, and before I get into that, I want to tell you one last story of community sanitation program that we're involved with, because in this community that in this region that we work in, there's over about 10% of the children die per year from sanitation-related diseases. So if we have like 30 people, that's like 30 deaths per year, okay? From highly preventable things like diarrhea, typhoid, and cholera. So like the decision of that previous organization, we also decided that, hey, what can we address in the community sanitation conversation to help to be able to save lives? But rather than the installation and the focus on developing stuff, we have to ask the question, what does it look like to focus on developing people rather than stuff? This is what we did. We started by bringing together the appropriate stakeholders. This is the Ministry of Health of the Kenyan government. We sit down with them. We find out, what are you guys doing in this area to promote health? How can we support to be a part of your long-term health strategy? So we're not just coming in doing a one-off type of a thing. And we go back and forth. We find out what we actually have that can be valuable to offer to support the health promotion that the government's already involved with doing. Once we develop a partnership, then we decide, okay, which communities do you guys know have the worst sanitation in the area, where the greatest morbidity and mortality is happening as a result of sanitation-related diseases. And so they helped us to identify a couple communities, one of which was Tulu. What do? We go to Tulu and we help to mobilize. Okay, that's one of the first big pieces of human-centered development work. We mobilize the community members, we literally mobilize them. We walk around the community and we have conversations in their areas of open defecation. We stand right there. It smells bad, there's flies, they're uncomfortable, they're embarrassed. And we start to talk about what this practice is and why they do it. We teach them by showing how flies can land from the human defecation to the food and back and forth. I don't need to tell them anything. By a simple demonstration like this, they see that the flies that are on their and the flies that are on their food are the same flies. And that in that process, they're transferring life-threatening diseases. And we do a couple other demonstrations and models, and in this process, you can imagine what's happening. Imagine if and also what we're doing is we're telling stories throughout this whole mobilization process, and community members are talking about their children that died from sanitation-related diseases. Their brother, their mother, their child. So we're bringing in the emotions which are required for effective and sustainable behavioral change, for them to be able to really engage with this issue. And they're having breakthroughs. Next, because we're partnered up with the local government, they step right in and they say, what you're learning is true, it's real, we need to change, this needs to become different. And so we get that message coming in from a lot of different fronts. It's Chief Bobo, he's a good friend of mine. And then what do community members do once they get it? They step up and they say, I want to be a part of the change. They say, I do not want to any longer be responsible for the suffering and death of the children in this area, the children being the most vulnerable to these sanitation-related diseases. And they literally sign their name on a proclamation that says, I'm going to change my behavior, and I'm going to support other community members in changing behavior so that we can help our community to become what we call open defecation free, or basically improve sanitation conditions. There's a picture of all the community members that made this commitment this one particular day in Tulu. But we don't stop there, because that's not enough. Next, from that group, we help to democratically formulate a committee that's going to help to be able to support long-term the sanitation improvement of that area. And they say, I am willing to be a volunteer leader in my community so that we can make sure this problem actually gets solved. And I'm willing to see it all the way through. Then we start the capacity building. We teach them, we educate, we train, we help them to better understand the diseases, we help them to better understand the threats, we help them to be able to better understand how to support community members in making behavioral changes, some of the social psychology behind that. We support them in organizing themselves with leadership so they can be able to be a long-term sustainable committee. We teach them about best practices on how the community members can make latrines out of their own local materials so they can start to be able to have to improve their sanitation of their community. And we teach them how they can implement hand washing before they go to church and before they prepare food and when they're sick so they don't get and spread diseases. And then we teach them how they can be able to share these messages with all their respective community members. We help them to be able to be organized geographically so each representative of this community has a respective number of families that they're responsible for supporting the process of the behavioral changes and the transformation, transfer of information that's going to help to be able to change their community. And through this organization and through adding capacity to this community, they're able to go inside from the inside out, help to be able to change the sanitation conditions of their communities, change lives, save lives, and usher in new possibilities for their community. So this is a community member who's helping to be able to pull jiggers out of children's feet, which is a sanitation-related parasite. These are other community members who have spontaneously started digging their own pit latrines so they can be able to change their practice because they committed to no longer defecate in the open. This is a community latrine that funds were collectively brought together to be able to build a larger latrine for community members to use that don't have their own pit latrines. This right here, if you look closely, it's a latrine, but rather than a bright blue plastic porta potty that came in from China, this is corn stalks, and they've created walls out of those corn stalks. What's the difference between walls made out of corn stalks and walls made out of plastic? Anyone who comes to this community can see what they did and go back to their community and replicate it. Okay? We empowered them to be able to identify their own problems, discover their own solutions, and implement those solutions with their own available resources. And you can compare this to a things-centric model that we talked about earlier. And there's a little bit of a difference in that process and a difference in results. Okay. How do we do it? It starts with understanding human transformation. It starts with understanding the actual social psychology behind behavioral change so that you know how to work with people to help them to be able to actually make sustainable changes. You need to understand what results in transformation of a human being and how they shift their perception from someone that's not able to make change to someone that is able to make change. So and this is the delta, the Greek sign for change, by the way, if you didn't know. So we understand how to be able to implement real behavioral change. That's the first thing you got to learn. What's the next thing you got to learn? The next thing you have to learn is what the role of a community development worker really is and how to position yourself for success. So rather than being a doer, which is actually the kind of the default space, is how can you act more like a consultant? And even a better word than consultant is guide. How do you actually act like a guide and support a community through those facilitations, through those educations and trainings? And also, how can you become knowledgeable in the potential topics that you'll be addressing in those areas, which is going to take additional education for you. Number 3, you have to understand how you actually use human capital. Okay? How you put human energy as the fuel of the development process. Because it's really, really easy to put money as the fuel of the development process. We want to achieve this thing. Great, what's our budget? Okay, I'm going to write a check for this, and this, and that's what I've got. Okay, we show up to a community with literally zero budget, except for just our own logistics. And then it becomes up to us, how do we now leverage the existing potential human energy that's there in the community and go from that to real community development work? And again, it's recognizing that human energy is the fuel, and it's leveraging the aspiration of every community member that wants to live a better life and leave a better life for their children. Connect to that aspiration and then enroll it in a process that can bring valuable results. It requires understanding the holistic nature of extreme poverty as a synergy or a synergistic result of all of these different drivers that we spoke about earlier, and how to be able to implement programming that understands the root issues so that the work that we do isn't so limited and we assume that one little program in this corner is going to be able to solve a problem. But yeah, we might want to start with one little program in this corner, but we need to do it in such a way that's going to support the development of some of these other areas. And just a little reminder on this tree here that this is what extreme poverty is. And the better that we can understand how to address all these issues and understand what they really are and become educated about what these challenges really are, really letting that stuff sink in. Only then, once we really get this, can we step onto the field as a community development worker and actually believe that we can help to solve problems. Because what? A problem well enough understood already has a solution. And when you understand what these problems really are, then you can really serve as a guide to support them in the solutions. And if you don't, you're not going to be very effective. Okay, so it's understanding the holistic nature of poverty and programs. Complex problems require comprehensive solutions. Number 5, understanding program sustainability, making today's efforts tomorrow's impact, right? Like he was asking, what are the immediate impacts? Well, the immediate impacts is we have a process moving. What I really care about are what are the long-term impacts. And it means that we're working through proper channels, like we talked about working through the government. It means we're using local materials, like the corn stock latrines versus the plastic latrines. There's a number of other things that we do that make sure that the work that we're doing is able to be sustainable and isn't going to be dependent upon anything external. But the community has everything inside that they're going to need, and it's going to be able to stay together. What do we do lastly? Lastly, we understand this principle called seed scale. Seed scale is a very powerful model. A lot of the workshop is actually going to be teaching how this model plays out. And what Jerry Sternin did in Vietnam is a perfect example of seed scale. He started with developing relationships, and then he identified positive deviants. That's what we call bright spots. The unique situations that are more positive than others. And then through that process, we support community members to be able to replicate what those positive deviants are doing, those bright spots, in a way that can be able to increase the quantity of people who are doing that thing, and then also increase the quality of that thing by analyzing lots of different bright spots and getting the best possible answer that we have available to us. And this scale, this model, it has some basic principles and tasks that an engineer is going to love. Because if you carry out these tasks with certain principles in mind, then it's going to set you up for success. And can it guarantee success? Absolutely not. But can it decrease the probability of failure? Absolutely. And that's what we really have to do. So in order to be effective, you have to understand how to be able to take a seed of a positive deviant and scale it up, something that's going to benefit the whole community. And you have to learn the principles and the tasks that are required for that to actually work. And last, you have to understand scaling. Okay? If you look at the seed, how it grows, not only is it increased in size, but it's also increased in complexity. Okay? And that's what effective community development work does. It's positioned that from the very beginning, we're able to enact a positive change that's going to continue to replicate, but it's also going to support other people in enacting other types of positive changes, which is going to increase the complexity of that positive change and thereby really address the issue holistically. So that's all. That's the how-to, okay? No biggie. Obviously, you can see that's just a roadmap of what it would really take. And in order to learn this stuff, there's a bit more education that's going to go in to be able to do an effective community development work. And it's understanding that is going to shift this industry. It's understanding that if I want to be a volunteer, before I can go and do something, I've got to actually get my stuff figured out. I've got to learn something. I've got to get trained first. You know, I had a professor that shared this line with me in college that I'll never forget. And he said, most people say, when they see something like people living in poverty, don't just sit there, do something. And he said, what if we re-engineer that sentence to be, don't just do something, sit there. Sit there for a while. Get your facts straight. Learn what you have to learn. Don't be in a rush to go out and do something. Add skills, add knowledge, learn, practice, experiment, study, network, whatever you got to do. Because we're talking about people that are living in extreme poverty. We're talking about people where daily life is a struggle for survival. And if you think that you're going to be in a position to support them in doing that, then you better believe that like an engineer who has to learn before he can build a bridge, or a heart surgeon who has to study before he can do heart surgery, you have to be able to learn how this stuff gets carried out before you can actually feel like you're going to be a valuable contributor to a community that's living in extreme poverty. Let me tell you one last story. There's a gal named Rima who was a community development worker. She was a volunteer, and she stepped into this community, Bameng, in India. And essentially, when she stepped onto the scene, she kind of put out this message. And it was, come learn how to keep children from dying, why boiling water is important, and how to learn to read and write. She put it out there. And she said, I'll be available at such and such time, come if you want to learn. And little by little, week after week, more women started showing up. She's taught them. She didn't give them anything at all. She's helped them to be able to have the skills that they were going to need. And not only to be able to have the skills, but also how to organize themselves as a women's group so they could work together in collective action and have an even greater impact. So after 1 year, the child mortality reduced from 23 that died in this community the previous year to 13. So a reduction of child mortality by 50% just by being able to teach mothers some basic things that they could do when their children were infants that would help them to be able to increase their probability of survival. After a little bit more time, these women mastered the treatment of diarrhea, pneumonia, and other diseases. As other people saw what this women's group was doing, the women's group replicated. And after 3 years, there were 17 groups, and they were carrying out income generation activities, gardening projects, literacy program. And in that 3 years, 40% of women who were illiterate in that region became literate because of the literacy programs of women in the community who already knew how to read that were supported to teach the other women how to read. After 5 years, not a rupee, which is Indian currency, not a rupee had been given to any needy communities. Not a cent, not a rupee. What was provided was knowledge and connectivity. And most importantly, a recognition of what they could do for themselves. In this process, the internal locus of control was reinforced like none other. And it wasn't, and remember the scaling conversation? It didn't just increase in quantity, but increase in complexity, or increase in the holistic nature. Because one positive change naturally spun them into another positive change. And this is the story of effectively carried out seed scale programs. It naturally happens this way. Because humans' aspirations are very real. And when you realize there's something that's within your grasp that can be improved, some type of suffering or some type of limitation you don't have to deal with, and you actually believe that you can do something about it, then you go for it. And the seed scale model supports community members in being able to identify their own problems, discover their own solutions, implement those solutions with their own available resources, which allows marvelous things to transpire in the long run. So what can we do to take action? I think this is a really important question because we've learned some stuff tonight, or at least I hope that we have. And there's some basic things that we can start to do collectively to be able to actually execute upon what we've learned. One is to come to that workshop that we mentioned. We've got some flyers that we'll pass out. I've got them up here. So please come get one if you're interested in that. Another is that we can start to be able to start these conversations, okay, with people that we knew that might be inside this conversation, but maybe don't know this stuff. And that conversation can shift them. I know that in 5 or 10 minutes of conversation that I've had with people, they've changed their minds to not go on a volunteer tourism trip. And they've actually looked at what they could possibly do to be more effective. We've had conversations with some Engineers Without Borders programs, and in some very short conversations, asking some of these key questions, we say, hey, you know what? Maybe we just want to restructure this program a little bit. So it's more focused. And more so than that, like, you can just ask yourselves what decisions you may have made, be making, or are going to make about being an international volunteer, about being a donor to a development organization, about supporting somebody else who wants to go on a volunteer trip, and really think about decisions that you might make that are different as a result of things we've learned tonight. What you're about to see is an overview of all the content that we've covered tonight. And we've talked about what's broken in development work. We've talked about what's broken in volunteer tourism. We've talked about what's working regarding human-focused development work. And we've given a brief overview, and I've served as a guide to show you what you need to learn if you actually want to be involved in this type of work in the future. If you want to contact me for any reason, that's my email address right there, Cory Glazier. If you want to get on the email newsletter, if you want to come to this future stuff that we're going to have, I would love that. And one last invitation that I want to leave out is what we're going to start to do is we're going to start to bring people together and have conversations about what we can do as global change makers to help to shift the industry in a positive direction, help it to become more focused on human-centered development work. And in that process, we're going to start to bring together the people that are really serious about this conversation. And over the next year or so, we're going to talk about what we can actually do to have this conversation loud enough that the whole world's going to hear it. And then we're going to start to make positive shifts. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I've been so grateful to be able to share this content, and I look forward to seeing what the results will be. So thank you so much.